Boa tarde, como estão vocês? Estão bem? Eu sou Spencer Gibb, sou líder do time do Spring Cloud. Sou dos Estados Unidos, do estado de Michigan. E estou muito animado de estar aqui hoje, minha primeira vez no Portugal. And now I'm going to speak English for the rest of my talk, okay? If that's the best applause I get, I'm super excited. So I'm going to start with a selfie. Is that all right with everybody? All right. Proof for my boss that I did work while I was here. So I've been on the Spring team for 10 years and really enjoy my job. And I'm going to talk about some of the things that are new just recently and over the last year or two as well. First, we will do a little bit of history. Spring has been around for a very long time. In some cases, 20, 21 years, depending on the date you look at, whether it's commit history or GA release. Spring Boot is 10 years old, and Spring Cloud is headed there as well. Our upcoming releases later this year, towards the end of the year. And if you ever wonder, out of all these versions, because we all have different version numbers in every project in Spring, what are they compatible? Go to start.spring.io and you can see what is compatible. So, has anybody here seen Josh Long talk? And a few of you, right? So, what's his favorite place on the internet? You know? Production. And the second favorite place on the internet? Start.spring.io. Anyway, so here you can add a dependency for Spring Cloud, and then you can see what versions match. So in this case, 3.3.0 and 23.0.2. So if you ever wonder. So some of the new things in Spring recently, we have a new baseline Java version, Java 17. We're really excited to be able to use a lot of the new language features and libraries. There was a big change from JavaX to Jakarta, right? So all those enterprise Java things that we had a big namespace change. Declarative clients were implemented in Spring Framework. We'll talk a little bit about that. And then we'll also talk about some of the native and AOT things that we have done. Observability moved out of the Spring Cloud project into Micrometer so that it could be used across more projects. And one of my teammates will be speaking about that later today, actually. So if you want to know more about the current state of observability, metrics, tracing, all that, go see Marcin speak later today. He is awesome. All right. So we've had many Java versions since 17, right? It's kind of a big deal now. Releases every 6 months, and we get new things. So when JDK 17 came out, and we were deciding on whether we should do a new major version, it was decided to raise the baseline. So that was the Spring Framework 6, Spring Boot 3, and anything later than Spring Cloud 2021. What we try and do on the Spring team is support all the long-term support JDKs, and then the current iteration of the 6 months. So I think now we're at 23. Anyway, I think I show that here in a little bit. But JDK 21 came last year, and we added support for that, which brings virtual threads. We'll talk a little bit about that as we go on. JDK 22 was just released, and so the latest versions of Spring Boot and Spring Cloud support JDK 22, and all these are all the new things that are in JDK 22. We'll get JDK 23 by the end of the year, and of course we'll have support for that as well. But when we have support for 23, we will then drop support for it for 22. So Spring Boot 3.3 just came out. What are some of the new things that are interesting here? So what I've tried to do is each of these little vignettes of what's new in Spring have some documentation links for Spring Framework and Spring Boot or the other projects where they are. So, and there'll be a link to the slides at the end, so you don't have to take a picture of everything. So an SBOM is a software bill of materials. And what it does is it describes all the dependencies included in your application. And this can be very useful for security, for compliance, for whatever regulation, whatever industry you're in. It's very useful to have that. So Spring Boot supports Cyclone DX, and it creates an actuator endpoint. So now you can query your applications and say, what do you include? What's packaged with you? And you can see, so here's a sample URL for an actuator, and then each component is listed, it's listed its version, and then some cryptographic hashes as well. That way you can compare to make sure that nothing's changed. Excuse me. Next is class data sharing. Oh, man. Sorry about that. Class data sharing. Whoa. My voice just went. It was all that Portuguese I was speaking. So class data sharing is a feature of the JVM, and it's been around for a long time, actually. What you do is when you pass some flags to the JVM on startup, and it creates a snapshot of all the classes that are loaded in your application. It creates an archive when you exit. Then you can share that archive with all your different applications and benefit. So recently, support was added in Spring Boot so that you could extract the application in a format that is suitable for CDS. And we also have build pack support. Build packs are like automatic image creators, and they make it so that you can build images via layers, and it's very, very handy support. Anyway, you can get some pretty fast startup times just by using class data sharing. Another thing that has changed recently is our documentation has been upgraded. Yay, documentation, right? In this case, it was Spring Boot's turn. You can see that we have things like a search box now, where we didn't have that before, and also links to all the other projects and resources on spring.io. Next, we'll talk a little bit about performance. So virtual threads, the former project Loom. Jürgen Haller, the lead of the framework project, said it was a new degree of scalability for Spring MVC applications. So they've added support for virtual threads in the schedulers and executors. And if you're using Spring Boot, all you have to do, for the most part, is set this setting to true. And when you do that, there's auto-configuration for your container, for framework, and other things that are have virtual threads enabled. Another bit of performance is checkpoint restore. Anyone notices my typo there? So the project is called Coordinated Restore at Checkpoint, or CRAC, which is not the greatest of names. But this also it's more comprehensive than the class data sharing. So this takes a whole snapshot of the JVM that's in memory and writes it to disk. So it's much more comprehensive. It's also further limited in scope. In fact, I think it only works on Linux right now. But we updated the lifecycle management features of Spring. So that we could turn things on and off consistently. And there will be more continuing work done on this as we go. If you want to learn more about performance and things, see Patrick's talk later today about lean Spring Boot applications. Patrick's right here in the front if you want to wave. He'll be right here on the stage later today. There were also some new clients created recently in Spring. First up, and my favorite, is RestClient. So in the beginning, there was REST template, right? Who's all heard of REST template? If you've used Spring, you've probably used REST template. It is trusty and it works well, but its API is a little unwieldy, right? So when Spring Framework 5 came out, they created a new client for Webflux, which had a great fluent API, but you had to use Webflux, right? So even if you wanted to just use the client, you still had to bring that in. So RestClient is the synchronous analog to web client. And it looks very nice and is very, very easy to use, right? You can see here at the bottom this nice fluent API rather than the big, long, parameters to different methods calls. So one of my goals was to use this in one of my projects, and it's now used in the new MVC gateway, which we'll talk about a little bit later. So similar is JDBC client. That is a fluent API over the JDBC template. So again, you can pass parameters and query parameters and all those things to the new template. And also there's a new support for Jetty's HTTP client. Testing, we all love testing. Who here loves testing? Oh, that's pretty good number of hands. I sometimes find myself, I just don't want to do this, I don't want to do testing. But test containers has been around for a little bit. Who has heard of test containers before? Good number of you. If you have not, test containers is a library that allows you to manage Docker containers during testing. And the Java integration is fantastic. So you annotate your class appropriately, and one or more Docker containers will start before your test runs. It's changed the way I view testing, and now when I need to test something, I can test against the real thing, whether that's a database or whatever it is that I need to be testing, I can use test containers. Spring Boot added a new annotation called service connection, because if you bring up a database, right, you need to know how to connect to that thing. What's the host? What's the port? What are the credentials? And this annotation bridges test containers and Spring Boot properties. And by default, there's support for all sorts of different things many of the things that Spring Boot provides auto-configuration for, there is support for test containers. And it looks something like this. You put test containers at the top, and then you define a container according to how to do that from the test containers, in this case, the JUnit integration. So in this case, we're testing Neo4j, and before any of our tests would run, it would require Neo4j to be up and running. So very awesome. So anytime I use it a lot for Redis, for example. And anytime I need a Redis container, I just do this, and it works very, very well. But also, you don't just develop an application with unit tests, right? You want to run your application, poke at it, and you want all those same services up. So there's a developer experience part of this that the Spring Boot team has created. So there's a new method on Spring Application that you can use in your test context, your test sources, and it allows you to configure these containers for your running application. So you create this test application in your test sources, and you reference your main application, and then you can provide all the containers it needs. Oh, boy. I'll need another one here. Thank you. I apologize. There must be some dust or something up here that I'm a little allergic to or something. Because I was just talking fine before, wasn't I? I didn't have this problem. Anyway. All right. So test containers has changed the way I develop applications and even the way I develop things in Spring Cloud. Along with test containers, there's also Docker Compose support. So this is where you have one file, it lists all the services that you want, and it manages multiple containers. And there is a module now in Spring Boot that allows boot to manage Docker Compose. So it will bring all those containers up or down. And it uses all those service connections to get all the right configuration, and you don't have to do anything. All right. So there are some new projects that have come about recently. The first is Spring Modulith, right? How many people here are doing microservices? A number of you, right? I mean, that's basically what Spring Cloud is designed to do, is to help folks do microservices. But it comes at a cost, right? So the increased complexity of microservices can be hard to deal with. So this project, it's called Spring Modulith, and allows you to efficiently build a monolith, right? But to keep the different modules separated. And there's validation that happens when you use it. It creates some documentation for you. It has testing facilities, and it also has runtime observation of your application to make sure that you're sticking to those defined boundaries. So this project is near and dear to my heart. The Spring Cloud Gateway MVC. So when I first created Spring Cloud Gateway a number of years ago, it was built on Webflux. And Webflux is built on Project Reactor, so it's a reactive streams application. Have any of you done any reactive streams, whether that's Reactor or something else? So a few of you, right? And it can be pretty complex, right? Just the nature of asynchronous programming like that can be difficult. So when virtual threads were going to be released in JDK 21, my team decided that it was time to build an MVC version. So when we had done Zool from Spring Cloud, from Netflix in Spring Cloud, that was built on servlets. And so for a number of years, there wasn't an option for an API gateway module from Spring Cloud that ran in MVC anymore. So we decided to build it. So it's built with webmvc.fn, so the Java DSL is provided by Spring Framework, where in the Reactor version we use a custom DSL. I wanted it to be simple, as opposed to the complexity in the Reactor version. Sometimes it's an organizational requirement, right, that Some organizations don't want to run Reactor, or they only want to run Tomcat or something like that, and Spring Cloud Gateway only ran on Reactor Netty. And you can now embed this in an existing Spring MVC application. I think I'm going to take a few minutes and do a demo of Spring Cloud Gateway. Where should it go? Oh, it's right there at the top. All right. All right, so in this case, we're using Spring Boot 3.3.0, and I'm using a snapshot here. Actually, we just released this, but I haven't had a chance to change it. And Spring Cloud Gateway Starter MVC. So we can show you a few of the things that we did before. Let's see. Oh, this is the class I wanted to show you. So here is my test application. You see I reference my main application here. It's got a few configured routes in it. But then we also have this class HTTP bin configuration. Has anyone heard of HTTP bin before? It's a website or a service that allows you to just send a request, and it responds with all the information you sent it. It's very handy while you're building an HTTP gateway. And so here, since there's no built-in container for this, I had to do my own thing. But I'm using the testing configuration that we just showed you. So this is the container that is running HTTP bin. So when I run this application, you can see over here, started very quickly, that here we're starting Docker that's running an HTTP bin container, okay? So super easy, super nice to use when you are building and running and debugging your own application as opposed to just running tests. So let me come back here. If you learn nothing from my talk today, I want to give you one of the tools I use almost daily in my development. It's called, well, first of all, who's here heard of curl? Curl command? Okay, awesome. Almost all of you, yes. So the tool I use is called HTTPy, and I call it curl for humans, which is what we are. We're not machines. Curl was meant for machines. So in this sample here, I've created a route. So this is what, if we go back to here, this is what a standard WebMVC.fn. So rather than the controller method, this is the functional method of doing things. It requires you create a route, and then you need some predicate to match your route. In this case, it's get/hi, and then there needs to be a handler to handle it. In this case, it's referencing this method here. So, but in this case, we do the same thing. We create a route. We get/anything, but instead of a custom handler method, we have this HTTP method provided by Spring Cloud Gateway. And what it does is it handles forwarding the request and retrieving the response for you. And I'll show you why HTTPy is curl for humans here. So you can see that the response is color-coded and formatted pretty, right? So that's HTTPy. So if you learn nothing else, you might have a new tool now, okay? Some more advanced samples. So I'll just show you this. I won't run this one. So in this case, we have get with this path, right? That's just shorthand for the HTTP method .get and the path, right? So you can do complex predicates here. A little more complex, you can check basically anything in the request. So in this case, you can check a header. So if we do that, terminal's right here. So it's going to match b.r, right? So if I say this, I'll get a 404, right? But if I do the original, then you can see we did the get here. And we passed, there's our header that we passed in. There are more complex predicates, such as host. You can nest predicates. We have customers that have thousands of routes, and they're waiting for this feature to be able to nest things to be more efficient. You can read the body. So in this case, we want this path, and the body must contain the string hello, right? So in HTTPy, in the previous example, you saw the colon separated, sent a header. In this case, if you put equals, it will send a JSON. So this was the JSON that was sent, and there's hello, right? So we made it there. You can also, now beyond predicates, you can start to do things with filters, like adding headers. You can change the path. But then you can start to do, you can also change the response. So you'll notice that there's a before. So these things can change the requests, and after can change the response. And you can also do some pretty complex things. So in this case, you can do rate limiting. If you want to read an interesting short white paper, you can go read about the token bucket algorithm, which is what our rate limiting is based off of. Basically, it's modeled after a physical bucket. Every X seconds, a token gets put in, and when a request comes along, it says, do you have any tokens? If you do, you take one out and you proceed. If you don't, you get an error message. So in this case, we have one token every 5 seconds. So if I submit the first one, it's fine. If I submit it again, I get HTTP 429, which is too many requests. And you can do other complex things like retry and circuit breaker and other patterns that we have. So that's my demo for today. Back to our presentation. So another new project that is pretty interesting is Spring CLI, where start.spring.io is for creating an application, right? You can't use it to update your application. Say you want to add JPA, right? Or Spring Data JDBC, right? You can't do that via start.spring.io. So this is built on Spring Shell, and it allows you to do those, we call them day 2 activities, right? Updating and modernizing your application. It also has, you can create applications through it. It has initializer support, but it also lets you modify and create your own custom packages that you can apply to a project. Whether they're Gradle or Maven, it really doesn't matter. And it also supports some AI things. So one of the hottest projects is Spring AI, for obvious reasons, right? There's a whole machine learning and AI track here at JNation, and we haven't not noticed that either. We've taken it to heart. But in classic Spring fashion, the idea here is that we don't implement an AI service, right? There are other people that have done that. What we do is create an abstraction over those so that the developer interface to them is the same and has a consistent feel regardless of which AI service you're using. So there are various interfaces that allow you to do that. There's also a prompt template so you can send information to these different services. We support those that are listed, and more are coming quicker than you can count. So there's an interesting, one of my colleagues, actually I don't think it was, but they wrote a full application in just a few lines of code that uses Spring AI, and it was pretty amazing how quickly it worked and what it could do. So where are we going with things? So for our support timelines, each version of a project is supported for a certain period of time in open source, and then beyond that we have commercial support. So for example, the previous Spring Framework line of 5.3, it will end open source support at the end of this year, but the commercial support will be another 2 years. And you'll see that some of the Spring Boot and Spring Cloud versions have already ended their open source and commercial support. But you can go online to the Spring website and see each project's support timelines. So they have a whole history here, but of all the recent ones, you can see when the support ends. So for example, Spring Cloud Gateway, you can see its support timelines here. We don't have a support timeline for the umbrella Spring Cloud project. It's up to each individual project for the support timelines. So later this year, we will have more information on CDS. So there is a project called Project Layden, which is an effort to take the work done on GraalVM and CDS, various different performance projects, and bring them into the JVM proper. So we are continuing to we work with the team at Oracle on the Project Layden and integrating it into the Spring Framework. There will be AOT, stands for Ahead of Time Compilation. So we'll continue to add support for those improvements to Crack and Layden. So Spring Framework 6.2 will come out later this year. We'll have initial support for Jakarta EE11. And there are some core framework and spell revisions, lots of little things. They've gone back through their backlog, which is extensive, being 20 years old, and have started to do some of those things that maybe haven't been as important or high a priority and are picking those things up now. One of those that's interesting is the @fallback bean definition, which allows you to, if there's not a primary one, or if there's not one defined, you can define a fallback bean. We also have started doing enterprise releases of Spring. So every quarter, all the Spring projects do an enterprise release that is for customers. And here, this is the commercial support that I was talking about earlier. We fix CVEs. Ooh, there we go. And customer-requested patches and bug fixes. And we also do dependency updates, but only at a patch level. So once you get to commercial support, you'll never see a library get updated to a minor version. And it's all in a private Maven repository. All right. So this year, we'll start the release train this summer with milestones of framework, boot, and cloud, and we'll all end up, it's a very interesting dance with the Spring team to do a release. We start with micrometer on one end, and then we go to reactor and framework, and then all the other projects, and then Spring Boot, and after Spring Boot, Spring Cloud. So it's very interesting to watch it all happen. But by the end of November or early December, we'll all have done our GA releases for this year. All right. Well, I think my little catch in my throat made me talk quicker, so I got through this much quicker than I normally do. What questions do you have? I can do more demo too if you'd like, but if you have any questions, I'd be happy to answer them. Go ahead.
So my question is about test containers. I want to ask, like, is there something I'm missing? Because when I tried test containers like 4 years ago, the project I was working on, we actually abandoned test containers because it made testing so slow. Is there some kind of a trick or configuration that I could miss? Or am I the only one to complain about this?
So his question or statement was that they abandoned test containers a number of years ago because it was slow.
It's really cool, by the way. I don't want to hate on it. It's a really cool project, but we tried, me and my team, we tried it for quite a while, but we let it go because it was just so slow.
Yeah, I think there are a couple of things. I think it has improved, right? My test container started, let's see, 43 in 2 seconds, right? Of course, HTTP bin is very lightweight, right? One of the things that I do, for every test, it would start a container, right?
Exactly, yeah.
You can do, they call them static containers, where you can...
I tried those too, yeah.
Yeah, I do that. In Spring Cloud Gateway, we have, excuse me, in Spring Cloud Console, we have a single container that comes up, and then we reuse that for all the tests. So that's one way we do it.
Okay. Well, maybe I missed something back then, I don't know. But yeah.
I mean, it also depends on what you're putting in the container, right? Like if it's Oracle and it's going to take 5 minutes to start up every time, then... I mean,
yeah,
not that I'm picking on Oracle. Sorry, that was a bad...
It wasn't just a simple database. It was more, so...
Yeah, so, it kind of depends on what you're doing. So,
okay. Thanks.
But it's transformed, like, I won't do anything without it anymore. It's so awesome. Anyway, thank you. More questions? If I don't see you, you can just talk because I got a bright light in front of me. Well, if not, what? Did I hear one? No? All right. Well, if you would just want to come talk to me after, we got a few minutes. So appreciate you coming to my talk. Thank you for your attention. Boa tarde e foi prazer.